So abdominals, we're a group of movement professionals that really want to do the best for our clients and the best for our patients. What do we need to know about you in order to allow us to give them our best and so they can move the best? And the abdominals would say, I'm glad you would ask, and as you can tell, we're really significant. We cover a large portion of the body. We go from the pelvis to the ribs and all the way around. But the abdominals would start with, but could I ask you a question first? And we'd say, sure. The abdominals would say, why do you train me in kind of what we would call a traditional way because it's confusing? And we'd say, what do you mean by that? The abdominals would say, well, why do you lay me on the ground? And why do you have my brain, which never talks to me, try to talk to me to turn and engage some of my muscles on internal and external obliques, but mostly my transverse abdominis? And why would you have me constantly over and over again flex my trunk and usually only do it in the sagittal plane and really overdevelop me into this flex posture when this is not the movement that you want, especially when you stand, when you work, when you play, when you dance? And I'd say, abdominals, tell me more. And the abdominals would say, well, I hate to admit it, but I think training me that way has actually caused problems in other parts of the body. You can see that if you're laying on your back and you're continuing to do this and this and this, that there's going to be a lot of compression in my lumbar spine. You can see me develop this kyphotic posture. That's not really what I want. And you can see me develop this kind of this hip flex posture. That's not what I want. So the abdominals would scratch his head and say, so why have you been doing that to me? Why do you do it conscious? Why do you do it in one plane? Why do you overstabilize me? Why do you do it artificial? And it would even say, and what's really confusing is when I stand, that's probably the only time I really don't help you, when I actually just kind of flex in the sagittal plane. Gravity does that ground reaction for us. And we go, well, in the first part of this newsletter, we tried to figure out what you really did. And the abdominals say, you got it. I really don't do that. I decelerate that and bring you back home. It's definitely in the sagittal plane, but it's the exact opposite direction. You can see where I get long and eccentrically stimulated. The abdominals would say, I do this, and I do that. I do control this, and this is kind of a frontal plane gravity thing, but when I get here, I want to decelerate and bring you back home, and we can feel the length of the abdominals here. And then the abdominals would say, but perhaps the most important thing is I decelerate this so you can accelerate that. I decelerate this so I can accelerate that. And the abdominals saying, if you remember, not only did I control the trunk in all three planes of motion, but I controlled the pelvis in all three planes of motion. I controlled its sagittal, frontal, and transverse plane motion. With every step you take and every breath you make, I am there and I'm ready to be stimulated. So the abdominals would say, if that's the truth of how I function, your strategy should emanate from that truth, and so our techniques should emanate from the strategy in applied functional science. And I kind of get a smile on my face now and say, abdominals, it almost seems like I need to drive you into the sagittal plane into extension, so now you can turn on so you can kind of bring me back home. Do that with maybe just a trunk driver or even my hand drivers. I can do both hands together. I can do one hand separate, and the abdominals say, now you're catching on. And I said, well, if I'm using the hands as a driver, maybe I can actually do an opposite side lateral reach where I can lengthen you and really turn you on, because the abdominals say, again, you understand, movement turns on proprioceptors. Proprioceptors turn on me, the muscle, not the brain. And so now you're getting at me in the frontal plane, and I'd say, well, this could be kind of easy but extremely fun and very powerful, because now I could lengthen you in the transverse plane with what we call a same side rotational reach. And the abdominals would say, now you got yourself something. And I said, but didn't you say you did something in the pelvis? I said, well, again, I attach to the pelvis. I control the pelvis in all three planes of motion. So maybe if I do something just with the pelvis, maybe if I get the pelvis moving with being upright and really get this length in here and turn you on, that would be powerful. And the abdominals would say, interestingly enough, just with that simple lunge, you're turning me on in the sagittal plane. Well, how about the frontal plane? The abdominals would say, wow, you're there, because again, my pelvis moving here and moving here lengthens me, turns me on, stimulates me, now you're after me. And I said, well, what about the transverse plane? How about some transverse plane lunges? And the abdominals would say, wow, great strategy. And I said, well, you know what's fun is we can start layering this strategy on. Understanding applied functional science, being able to take advantage of that knowledge would allow me to say, well, maybe I just start in what we call XXX, and I just do a reach with light weights or just with no weight right now, and gradually increase it where I do a posterior reach, an opposite side lateral reach, and a same side rotational reach. And the abdominals would say, well, that would be brilliant. But then I'd say, Wouldn't it be cool to change the position of the pelvis to know that you control the motion of the pelvis? But if I start with changing the position and maybe doing that same shoulder to overhead matrix in what we call RXX, and abdominals would say, and then what the mirror image would be, well, that would be LXX, and then the abdominals say, what do you want to do in the frontal plane? Well, that's kind of easy. I'm going to go wide with that same thing because the reaction into my core, into you, the abdominals, and my hips going to be entirely different. The abdominals would say, well, you probably want to go narrow too because now you're going to free me up in the frontal plane a lot more. So now I'm going to have to control that pelvis as while I control the trunk, and I'm saying, wow, this is getting fun. And then, of course, the abdominals would say, and then you might even want to toe in and toe out to change the position of my hips and obviously my lower extremities while you do that. And I go, well, what would maybe a step further be? And say, well, a step further would be, you remember that lunge that you did that I controlled? We'll do the lunge with the reaches. Now I can do a right foot anterior lunge with both reach, same thing with the left foot. I can do my frontal plane lunges with my reaches. I can do my transverse plane lunges with my reaches, but then again, wait a minute, I can do that same common lunge matrix, forward, sideways, and rotate while I'm driving my hands in the frontal plane. Abdominals are saying, you're starting to understand all the things that I can do for you. And then I could say, well, then I could do my transverse plane lunge while I go through the transverse plane reach, and so I can start combining them based on what my patient or client says they're going to do. So if my patient and client says, well, I like to walk, and I realize that I'm doing some sagittal plane lunges, but walking involves this extension, walking involves this lateral flexion, and walking certainly involves this rotation to the opposite side, the abdominals are saying, you're getting it. You're understanding applied functional science, the truth so well that you're coming up with powerful strategies, that you're figuring out the techniques on your own because you ask, what's the truth first? The truth will give you your strategies, and then all of a sudden the techniques are going to be obvious. And I'd say, well, maybe I can even create more freedom of the pelvis by actually doing a single leg balance. And the abdominals, again, get a big grin on his face of, man, you're really putting this together, because when I'm single leg, my pelvis can move in the frontal plane. My pelvis can simply move in the transverse plane. My pelvis can move in the sagittal plane. And all of a sudden I say, with this movement, if I do my shoulder to overhead matrix where I go posterior, opposite side lateral, same side rotational, all of a sudden you see my pelvis move in 3 planes of motion, my trunk move in 3 planes of motion. That motion is stimulated through my thoracic spine and my shoulders, and of course through my hips and my legs. And all of a sudden the abdominals say, and you get it. Because as soon as that happens, as soon as you feel that, I sense that because my proprioceptors tell me that's what you're doing. Proprioceptors turn me on, and all of a sudden, guess what? You're going to have a good internal oblique, a good external oblique, a good transverse abdominis, and a good rectus because you've turned us all on in all 3 planes of motion. And then the abdominals say, but again, remember, more tweaks. You can do some different drivers with your feet, different drivers with your hand. You can start to add a little bit of load. You can do an asymmetrical load. You can use your tweak of speed. You can change the environment that I'm in. And then you can gradually understand how I work in some of the various positions. And when you start to put that all together, you're going to say, you know what? Abdominals, you're such an important part of the person that I'm taking care of, that knowing more about you and knowing how to stimulate you and knowing how to position you and drive you and getting you to movement into proper movement, then I can really enhance the life of that person who you're attached to. And the abdominals say, guess what? That's the name of the game. That's what it's all about. If you understand applied functional science, and if you understand this power, then you'll be able to gift your patients and clients with fully functioning abdominals the way they function in their real life, in their real play, in their real work.